Welcome to Revolution Chronicles. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss these untold stories of our past. Tonight, we step back to the year 1867, deep in the Missouri Ozarks, where a lonely cabin promised weary travelers nothing more than water. But what those brothers offered was not life, it was death. And the well outside their door would soon reveal one of the most chilling secrets of the American frontier. The year was 1867, and the Missouri Ozarks stood as a land both beautiful and haunting. Rolling hills stretched out in every direction. Thick forests of oak and hickory covering the land like a green sea. Creeks cut through valleys, their waters clear and cold, winding their way past small cabins, smokehouses, and the faint echoes of axes splitting logs. The Civil War had ended only 2 years earlier, yet its scars were still fresh on the land and the people. Many men had not returned home, leaving farms in ruin and families broken. Some towns, once alive with the hum of trade and laughter, were now hollow shells where silence pressed as heavy as grief. It was in this unsettled time that travelers moved across Missouri's backroads, making their way toward Arkansas or further west. They rode horses, drove wagons, or walked with weary steps. These were not the wealthy, not the fine gentlemen of eastern cities, but farmers, trappers, drifters, and families chasing hope for new beginnings. They carried few possessions, sometimes just a rifle, a Bible, and a sack of cornmeal. The road through the Ozarks was long and often lonely. Nights were dark, with only the sound of whippoorwills and the crackle of brush beneath coyotes' paws. For travelers, kindness was both a blessing and a necessity. A friendly homestead offering water, a warm fire, or a meal could mean the difference between survival and despair. It was on one such road, tucked between dense woods and rocky slopes, that two brothers set up their home. To the passing stranger, their place looked ordinary, perhaps even welcoming. A small cabin of rough-hewn logs, smoke rising from its chimney, a well not far from the door, and a rough sign that promised water and rest for those who stopped. The brothers, whose names would one day be whispered with unease, presented themselves as plain men, hard-working, quiet, and willing to offer a cup of water to the thirsty. Yet beneath that plainness, beneath the weathered faces and calm voices, there lingered something far darker. The Civil War had done strange things to men. Some returned home hardened, carrying shadows that could not be shaken. Others learned to survive by cruelty, by taking what they could when law and order collapsed. In Missouri, a border state torn by guerrilla fighting, many young men had grown up in violence. Bloodshed had seeped into the soil, and outlaws rode the same roads as honest men. In such a place, suspicion came easily, but it could also be dulled by desperation. A thirsty traveler might set aside doubt for the chance at water or rest. And that was what the brothers counted on. Travelers who stopped often found themselves greeted with polite nods. A tin cup dipped in the well, a jug carried out with a promise of clean, cool refreshment. The weary stranger would drink, grateful, and perhaps offer a word of thanks. Then time seemed to blur. Some never remembered much after that. Others never had the chance to speak again. In the years after, whispers spread among locals about those who had vanished. A man bound for Arkansas who never arrived. A family wagon last seen near the Ozark Ridge, gone without trace. A trapper who told a friend he'd stop at a cabin for water, but whose belongings later turned up in another's hands. Missouri in 1867 was not a land of careful records. People vanished often, swallowed by wilderness or by violence along the road. But there was a pattern, faint yet chilling, and at the center of it, the brothers' cabin. The tale begins to unfold, not only in mystery, but in the quiet fears of the neighbors who lived nearby. They had seen men ride toward the brothers' place and never ride out again. They had heard stories of a well that seemed to give more than just water, that its depth held secrets best left undisturbed. Yet in those days, to accuse was dangerous. Without law close at hand, justice was often taken into one's own fists, or not at all. Neighbors might suspect, but suspicion alone could not bring answers. And so the road remained dangerous, and the brothers remained free. What gave their tales such lasting chill was not just the deaths themselves, but the way they hid cruelty behind kindness. A weary traveler, parched and trusting, would step forward to accept water. To drink was to believe in the goodness of strangers, to share a moment of human connection on a lonely road. But here, that trust was twisted into betrayal. The very act of reaching for water, the oldest gesture of hospitality, became the first step toward death. And that was the heart of the brothers' darkness, the way they took something sacred and turned it into a trap. The Ozarks of 1867 were not a place where news spread quickly. A murder in one hollow might never be heard of in the next. But as stories grew, as more travelers failed to return, questions began to rise. The cabin that had once seemed a place of comfort now stood in shadows. Those who passed by kept there, eyes fixed ahead, urging their horses faster, unwilling to stop. Even so, not all could resist. The road was long, the sun hot, and thirst was merciless. And so the cabin kept drawing the weary like moths to a flame. And the brothers kept serving water that quenched no thirst at all. Time would reveal some of what they had done, though never all. Bones would be found, possessions uncovered, but the full count of lives taken was lost to the wilderness. What endured instead was the legend, the story of two brothers whose names became wrapped in fear, whose cabin became a symbol of betrayal, and whose well came to be seen as cursed. It is a story that lingers not just because of what happened, but because of what it says about trust, about kindness, and about the darkness that can hide behind a friendly face. And so, in that year of 1867, in the shadowed hills of Missouri, the mystery began, one that would never be fully solved, but would forever haunt the memory of those who heard it. A mystery born from a simple offer of water on a lonely road, and from the hands of brothers who served not life, but death. The brothers' names faded into legend, but in the years just after the war, they were flesh and blood, and they were known to their neighbors. They were not outsiders drifting in from some faraway place. They had been born in Missouri soil. Raised in the rhythm of hard winters and sweltering summers, the crack of rifles in the woods, and the simple work of farming rocky land that often gave more stone than corn. Yet their hearts, people said later, had grown twisted. Some blamed the war. Others spoke of greed. Still others whispered of cruelty that had always lived in them, waiting for its moment to rise. The younger brother was the more talkative of the two, known for his sly smile and quick words. He could greet a traveler like a friend, offering not only water, but a little story, a question about where the man was headed, a laugh that carried just enough warmth to lower defenses. The older brother was quieter, sterner, the sort who watched more than he spoke. He let his sibling handle the talking while he lingered in the shadows, his eyes sharp and unreadable. To those who stopped by, it might have seemed a simple balance between two men making their way in a hard world. But to those who looked closer, there was something unsettling and unease that clung to their presence like a cold draft in summer. They had returned from the war, like many others, with scars that could not be seen. Missouri had been torn apart by raiders, bushwhackers, and Union patrols. And the brothers had drifted between sides, fighting when it served them, hiding when it didn't. They had seen neighbors burned out of their homes, families slaughtered for taking the wrong oath of loyalty, and young boys shot down on suspicion alone. In that chaos, life had become cheap and death had lost its weight. When the war ended, peace did not come to everyone. Some men could not leave behind the taste of violence, nor the way it offered power. It was in those lawless years that the brothers turned their cabin into something more than a home. The sign outside offering water seemed like an act of kindness, but it was the first piece of bait, for who could resist? The roads were long, the dust choking, and the horses foamed at the mouth with thirst. A simple stop for refreshment was not only natural, it was necessary, and the brothers knew how to make a man feel welcome. But what came after was not kindness. Some said the water was laced with poison, a bitter taste hidden beneath the freshness. Others swore the cup itself was not the trick that the brothers struck their victims when they were distracted, seizing them in sudden violence. Whatever the method, the result was the same. The traveler never left. His horse might be traded. His rifle might be sold. His boots passed to another man, but he himself vanished. Leaving only questions, it took time for neighbors to notice the pattern. Missouri was wild then, and disappearances were not uncommon. A man might fall to sickness, be swept away in a river, or vanish into the forests where panthers still roamed. Families often moved without warning, chasing land further west. And so, for each missing person, there was an excuse, a reason that seemed to explain it. Yet in hushed tones at church meetings or while mending fences along the boundary lines, neighbors began to murmur. Didn't he say he was stopping at the brothers' place? One farmer might whisper, I thought I saw their horse wearing his saddle. Another would mutter, too many gone, all near that cabin, came the final uneasy thought. Still, fear kept tongues from wagging too loudly. These were men who had lived through the war, who knew the price of crossing the wrong soul. Accusing them without proof could mean a bullet in the dark. And besides, the law was far away. In those days, the sheriff might not come for weeks. And by then, evidence would be long gone. So the neighbors watched, and they waited, carrying unease like a hidden stone in their chests. The mystery deepened when a wagon was found, abandoned not far from the brothers' land. Its canvas cover was torn, its belongings scattered, and the tracks around it spoke of struggle. No bodies were found, no clear answer left behind, but the memory of that wagon spread quickly. Some said it belonged to a family bound for Arkansas. Parents and children alike swallowed up without a trace. Others thought it might have been a trader carrying goods, his life taken for the profit of a few silver coins. Either way, it added fuel to the whispers. Soon the cabin took on an air of dread. What had once seemed like a place of rest became a place to avoid. Travelers spoke of it with unease. Some swore that at night, if you passed close, you could hear cries carried faintly on the wind, like voices trapped beneath the earth. Others said the well was cursed, that its depths held more than water, and that it was dangerous to draw from it. Even for the innocent, the brothers themselves seemed unfazed by these shadows. They kept to their patterns, offering water when no needed, trading horses, selling goods at distant markets. They never boasted, never flaunted, never drew attention. That restraint made them harder to catch, harder to pin with guilt. But it also deepened the mystery. For what sort of men could live so calmly while others whispered of blood at their door? It was in the autumn of that year, when the leaves turned red and gold, and the evenings carried the first bite of frost. That suspicion finally broke into fear. A young man, barely 20, had set out on the road south with dreams of land in Arkansas. He carried his hopes in a worn satchel and led a mule laden with tools. He was seen last by a farmer, who gave him directions down the very road that passed the brothers' place. Days later, when the mule turned up wandering without its master, the whispers grew louder. The young man's fate was never known, but his disappearance became the breaking point. Too many had gone missing. Too many had passed the cabin and never been seen again. The neighbors began to talk not only of suspicion, but of action. Yet, even then, Fear held them back. Who would strike first? Who would risk the wrath of the brothers? Without a sheriff close by, justice meant risk. To act was to gamble one's own life, and many were not ready to take that step. And so the brothers. Cabin stood still, its chimney smoking, its door opening to strangers, its well gleaming in the sun. But beneath the surface, beneath the ordinary rhythms of life, the truth festered. A shadow hung over that place, a shadow that only grew darker with each traveler who vanished into its depths. The year 1867 moved toward winter. And with it, the land grew quiet. Snow came to the Ozarks, blanketing the hills, hiding tracks, covering the secrets buried in the ground. But the silence did not erase the questions. It only made them heavier. For every missing man, for every abandoned wagon, for every mule that returned without its master, there was the same question on every lip. What truly happened at the cabin by the road? And what lay hidden in the well of the brothers who served death, not drink? The winter of 1867 pressed down hard on the Ozarks. Snow weighed heavy on the branches, creeks froze at their edges, and the air carried the kind of cold that seeped into bone and lingered. The roads grew lonelier still, for few dared to travel long distances when storms threatened and nights stretched bitter and long. Yet, even in that season of silence, the unease did not ease. The cabin of the brothers still stood, smoke curling. Upward, a beacon on the road where no beacon was trusted by then. Too many were gone. A family who had been bound south, a pair of traders carrying pelts. A young soldier recently returned from the war reach, one last seen on the road, each one swallowed in the shadow of that place. Neighbors, already cautious, began to refuse even to pass by. Some said they would rather go miles out of their way, through rocky ravines and half-frozen streams, than to risk riding past the brothers' land. Yet curiosity is a force as strong as fear, and it was curiosity that finally led to the first glimpse of truth. One evening, a man named Harlanan, old settler with a stubborn streak, rode out to check on some traps he had set near the creek. As he moved past the edge of the brothers' property, he noticed something that stopped him cold: a boot lying half-buried in the snow. Its leather stiff from cold, but its shape still whole. When he dismounted to look closer, his heart tightened. He recognized it. It belonged to the young man who had vanished only weeks before the one bound for Arkansas with a mule. Harlan said nothing that night, but he did not sleep. The next morning, he went to a neighbor, his face pale with the weight of what he had found. Word spread quietly, as it always did in the hills, moving from cabin to cabin, spoken low but spoken all the same. Some doubted, some grew restless, and some whispered that it was finally time to act. The chance came not long after, when a storm broke and the snow melted just enough to soften the ground. Tracks were easier to see then, and men on horseback could follow the signs of wagons and boots. A small group of neighbors gathered, their numbers few but their determination firm. They carried rifles and pistols, not for show, but because they knew that if their suspicions proved true, the brothers would not yield quietly. They rode to the cabin under a pale sun, the ground still patchy with snow, their horses' breaths steaming in the air. The cabin looked quiet, smoke rising from the chimney as if it were no different from any other homestead. But when they dismounted and knocked at the door, the brothers' faces told another story. Surprise, sharp and fleeting, flashed across their eyes. They were not men accustomed to being questioned. The neighbors asked about the travelers. Where had they gone? Had they stopped there? The brothers answered calmly at first, saying little, offering shrugs and vague replies. We saw no one, they claimed. The roads are dangerous. Perhaps they lost their way. But the men at the door pressed harder, their voices firm, their hands tight on the barrels of their rifles. It was then that one of the neighbors, A farmer named Mathis noticed something strange. By the edge of the well, in the soft ground, were marks too large for an animal and too irregular for simple work. He walked toward it, his boots crunching, and peered down into the darkness. The smell hit him first. It was not the clean scent of water drawn from stone, but something foul, thick, and unmistakable. His stomach turned, and his voice cracked as he called the others over. Together, with ropes and lanterns, they began the grim work of discovery. What they pulled from that well chilled every man present to the core. Bones, some fresh, some old, rising up in pieces from the cold water below. Not just one, but many. Skulls with empty sockets, ribs scattered, fragments that once belonged to travelers who had stopped for a drink. The well was not simply cursed, it was a grave, and it had been hiding death for months, perhaps years. The brothers stood by, their expressions shifting from calm to stone. They did not beg, did not protest, did not confess. Their silence was worse than denial, for it seemed to carry a weight of acknowledgement without shame. Neighbors later swore they saw no flicker of guilt in their eyes, only a kind of cold resignation, as if they knew this day would come and had no intention of running from it. Shock gave way to fury. These were men who had lost kin in the war, who had seen their families suffer, who had walked through years of hardship only to now face betrayal from their own neighbors. To offer water was a sacred trust on the road. To twist it into murder was an evil that cut deeper than greed. Voices rose, fists clenched, and the group came close to dragging the brothers out then and there. But there was division. Some cried for justice on the spot, saying the brothers deserved no trial. Others argued that to kill them outright would make the community no better than the murderers themselves. In the end, restraint held barely. The brothers were bound, their hands tied with rough rope, their cabins searched from floor to rafters. Inside were found belongings that did not match their simple lives' rifles. Saddles, clothing, a child's doll with its face worn. Evidence of lives taken, stripped, and kept like spoils. The community's rage boiled over in whispers that would not be silenced. Families who had lost loved ones demanded answers. Travelers who had once doubted the stories now spread them wide. And the tale of the death well began to grow beyond the hills. Missouri in those days was full of rumors and stories, but this one struck deep. For it told not only of murder, but of betrayal at the most basic level. Hospitality turned into a weapon. In the weeks that followed, fear mingled with relief. The cabin stood empty, the brothers under guard, but the questions remained heavy. How many had they killed? How many bones lay hidden still in that well, or scattered in the woods around their home? Some said a dozen, others swore it was more. The truth was likely lost, swallowed in the darkness of the well and the silence of the killers. Yet the story did not end with discovery alone. Justice had to be carried out, and in those days, justice was not always written in books or carried by judges. It was written by the hands of the people, by rope and by fire, by the heavy weight of community wrath. And the brothers, for all their calm, were about to learn that the road they had chosen left no escape and no mercy. The well, once a source of life, had become a place no one dared to touch again. Even when the ropes had drawn the last bones from its depths, it seemed to breathe foulness into the air. Neighbors filled it with stone, burying it beneath the earth, but they could not bury the memory. The ground itself seemed stained, a mark on the land that would never fade. And as word spread, the tale of the brothers began to move beyond the Ozarks, carried by travelers who now told not only of hunger and hardship, but of a cabin where water was death, and of men who turned trust into murder. The stage was set for the final act, and the people were ready to deliver judgment. The Ozarks in early 1868 were a land holding its breath. Winter still lingered, though the days stretched a little longer, and the snow began to break apart in patches. But the people of the hills were not watching the skies that season. They were watching the fate of the two brothers who had poisoned the very meaning of trust. The men were bound and held under guard in a neighbor's barn at first, for there was no proper jail nearby. The sheriff had been summoned from the county seat, but he was days away, and the roads were nearly impassable. That left the decision in the hands of the community, and the weight of it pressed heavy at night. Men gathered by lamplight in cabins and barns, their voices low but fierce. The war had left them wary of lawmen, for too many times the law had been absent or corrupt. Many said there was no need to wait for a sheriff who lived far away and cared little for their roads. "What law will do better than our own?" asked one farmer. "How many more must die before we trust the law to act?" Others cautioned that vengeance taken in haste could stain them all, that they must hold to something higher than rage. Yet even those voices trembled with anger, for the bones from the well still haunted their dreams. The women, too, spoke with passion. Mothers who had lost sons on those roads, wives who had buried husbands and never learned the truth, demanded justice. One old widow, her face carved with lines of grief, stood before the gathered men and said, "If the law does nothing, then God Himself will hold you to account." Those brothers took more than lives. They broke the bond between neighbor and dictige. And, stranger, they made the road itself a thing of fear. And if you do not see it set right, then fear will rule here forever. Her words struck deep. The men knew she was right. In the Ozarks, the road was lifeblood. Farmers hauled corn to mills. Trappers carried furs to market. Families moved with wagons in search of better land. To poison the road was to poison the future. The brothers had not only killed travelers, they had broken the fragile trust that bound community to community. Stranger to stranger, by the time the sheriff arrived, the decision had already been made. He listened as the people laid out their case, the missing, the evidence, the bones drawn from the well. He could see the fire in their eyes, the resolve in their voices. He may have worn a badge, but he was wise enough to know that out here, far from courthouses and judges, the law was not written in paper, but in the hearts of the people. And their hearts had spoken. The brothers were marched to a clearing knot. Far from their cabin, their hands bound, their faces unreadable. Some said the younger smirked to the end, as if daring the crowd to act, while the older kept silent, his eyes cold and distant. The people gathered in solemn silence. There was no cheering, no drunken rage, only the heavy weight of what had to be done. A rope was thrown over a sturdy oak limb, rough and ready, the kind used for hauling logs or hanging meat. Now it would serve for justice. The crowd gave the brothers a chance to speak. The younger laughed once, low and sharp, but said nothing more. The older's lips pressed thin, and he kept his silence. No confession, no denial, no apology. Perhaps they believed words no longer mattered. Perhaps they simply did not care. And so it was finished. The ropes tightened, the tree bore its burden, and the brothers who had offered death in place of drink met their own end beneath the branches of the Missouri woods. Their bodies swung in the cold air, a grim warning against betrayal, a sign that the community would not let such darkness fester again. The cabin was burned soon after. Flames licked up the walls, sparks flying into the night sky as neighbors stood and watched. There was no joy in the fire, only necessity. The land had to be cleansed. The well, already filled with stone, was left untouched, its foul memory sealed beneath the earth. In time, weeds grew over the place, and the forest reclaimed it. But those who lived nearby would not forget. They spoke of it in low voices, teaching their children to be wary, reminding them that not all who smile are friends, and not all who offer kindness do so with good intent. The tale spread far beyond the Ozarks. Travelers carried it into Arkansas, Kentucky, Tennessee, even as far as Texas. Each time it was told, it grew a little darker, a little more chilling. Some swore dozens had died at the brothers' hands. Others told of travelers who escaped, poisoned but alive, bringing word of the evil on the road. The truth became tangled in the telling, but the heart of it remained: two brothers, a cabin, a well, and the betrayal of trust. And as the years passed, the story became less about the men themselves and more about what they represented. In a land built on hospitality, they were the warning of what happens when that bond is broken. In a country still healing from war, they were the reminder that violence can linger long after peace is declared. In a time when strangers often depended on each other to survive, they were the shadow that made every knock at a cabin door carry a flicker of doubt. Old men told the story by firelight, their voices low, their eyes reflecting flame. Young ones listened wide-eyed, imagining the cabin, the well, the bones. Some said you could still feel a chill if you passed near the place where the cabin once stood, that the ground itself remembered. Others swore that at night, if the wind was right, you could hear the creak of rope in the trees. Whether those tales were true or not hardly mattered. They lived because they spoke to something deeper than fact. They spoke to the unease in every traveler's heart. The fear that behind a smile could lurk a knife, that behind an offer of water could lie betrayal. The Ozarks healed, as they always did. Roads changed, towns grew, new families built farms on old ground. But the story of the brothers never fully faded. It lingered in the soil, in the rivers, in the echoes of footsteps on lonely trails. It became not only history, but legend. The kind of tale that made men pause on long rides, glance at cabins with wary eyes, and remember that even in the most ordinary of places, darkness can take root. And so, Mystery of 1867 was never truly solved, for it was not a mystery of who or how. It was a mystery of why men, born of the same soil, raised with the same hardships as their neighbors, would turn against the sacred trust of the road. That question was never answered. The brothers went to their graves with silence on their lips. Yet the people answered in their own way. They met cruelty with unity, betrayal with justice. They reminded the land and each other that while evil may rise in the shadows, it cannot stand long when a community refuses to bow to it. And so the tale ends where it began. On a lonely road in the Missouri Ozarks, the trees still whisper, the creeks still run cold, and the wind still carries the sounds of whippoorwills in the night. But somewhere beneath that soil, deep in the memory of the land itself, lies the story of two brothers who offered water and gave death instead, and of a people who would not let that betrayal stand.